بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
You could take your places.
Just one.
So welcome to everyone for today's event. Can there be morality without God? And I should say that this event is being sponsored by the Annual Fund, and it's an event of the Society of the Program Islam and the Social Sciences, and this is an event in their lecture series. So let me introduce our speakers. We have Professor Tariq Ramadan on my right here. He's a professor of contemporary Islamic studies in the Faculty of Oriental Studies at Oxford University, in the Oriental Institute, St. Anthony College, and he teaches at the Oxford Faculty of Theology. He's a prolific writer. His last book, I think, is Arab Awakening. Is that correct, or does it need to be updated? That's correct, 2012. All right, and of course, public intellectual. And then on my left, I have Dr. Ahmed, Dr. Arif Ahmed, who is a senior lecturer at Girton College in Cambridge University at the Faculty of Philosophy, and he has an interest in Wittgenstein and in decision theory. And I thought, this was such a wonderful theme, such an exciting thing to debate, and I thought I'd just, throw out two quotes here that are well known, I think, and that sort of encapsulate in a way the debate. There's the old quote of the brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky, and apparently there's a whole discussion on the web that this quote is actually not in the brothers Karamazov, but here's how it goes. If God is dead, all is permitted. Apparently Sartre sort of read it into the brothers Karamazov, but it's not in the actual book. But anyway, it's a meme and it's definitely going around. If God is dead, all is permitted. You may have heard it before. So that, of course, is one side of the debate. The other side of the debate is Albert Einstein. A man's ethical behavior should be based effectually on sympathy, education, and social ties and needs. No religious basis is necessary. Man would indeed be in a poor way if he had to be restrained by fear of punishment and hopes of reward after death. So that's the other side of the debate. But I think we should go straight to our speakers now. So, Professor Tariq Ramadan, you will be the first speaker. We'll go for about 20 minutes each, then there'll be a response of 10 minutes from one speaker to the other, and then we'll open it up to the audience, and we would like to finish actually at 5:30. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation here. It's a critical question, and I will start by questioning the question, as I am very often doing when I have such questions, by saying as an introduction three things. The first is when we speak about God and when we speak about the relationship between human beings and God, when we put this in such a way, say, do we need God for such and such? It's as if we were thinking about our relationship with God as if we need Him to solve existential problems, or we need Him to respond to some of our questions. And I think that this is an utilitarian approach. Stuart Mill, in the whole philosophy, is in fact transforming the whole question of, oh, you need God because you are scared of dying. You need God because you want to have these answers. And I think it's a question which is put from outside the very deep relationship when it comes to spirituality and when it comes to the relationship to the transcendence. So this perception from outside is reducing our relationship and the relationship to the divine in two ways. First, we need God to respond to our questions, and without Him we are lost. And this is where some people, atheists, are saying, in fact, it's much more difficult for us to deal with these existential questions because we have no God. It's as if, once again, it's all behind the whole thing is the utilitarian approach, which is you are trying to suffer less, which is what we find in Nietzsche's philosophy, in the way he was questioning, tell me what you do with your suffering, I will tell you who you are. Because if you face your suffering, this is why you are a human being. But if you hide yourself behind God as an answer, by the way, it is with in Dostoevsky. I'm not sure in this book, but Dostoevsky wrote it. Now it's true that Sartre is referring to it in l'existentialisme et un humanisme. He's referring to this, but it's coming from Dostoevsky for sure. In the relationship that, and I would even think that it's in this book because it's Dimitri who is talking about that, but anyway, one of the characters. Second thing is, we need God to have moral, or we have rules, and this is the way, as we don't know how to deal with our freedom, God is there to give us some rules to direct us in the childish attitude. Once again, all this is coming from an outsider perception of the relationship and the relationship to God. It's as if, once again, it's talking about God or talking and addressing the question of God presence through a very intellectual framework, only intellectual. And the very essence of this relationship is not intellectual. And the best way to get this is if you try to explain to me with your mind what is in your heart and what you love, you're not going to get that. And this is where I think that the question is problematic when it comes to connecting God to morality and saying we need God to get morality and morality is not there without God, which in fact is not said by almost all the main religious traditions. This question is not proposed by any religious tradition. Many Christians, many Jews, many Muslims, and even spiritualities without transcendence are not connecting their spirituality and the presence of God to morality. They would not say, yes, we need God to get this morality. Some of them are saying, it's innate, it's within us. So, in fact, even if you deny God, it doesn't mean that you are immoral. Or it doesn't mean that you will have an immoral behavior. So this question is very often an atheist question addressed to religious people, and some dogmatic religious minds are reducing morality to the reference to God, and I think that they are wrong in this. They are reducing their own tradition. Third point, which is important, is, in fact, and this is why I like this question, even if I question the question, is in fact it pushes us to come to something that is completely missing in our discussion. Among religions and with atheists and agnostics is the concept of human being. Every single religion is producing a concept of human being. What is a human being and what is the ultimate end, purpose, goal, essence in this understanding of the way we define a human being. And we need to come to this discussion. Instead, between religions and with atheists and agnostics, talking about the periphery is you are lost if you don't believe and you are saved if you believe. At the periphery, we are not talking about the essence of our understanding. Tell me first why and how you define human being, the very essence of it. And this is where I want to come to something which is from an Islamic perspective, as it is also something that is addressed by students here, but we can find this in all, at least the monotheistic traditions are sharing something here as to the concept of human being, and there is something which is very special that you can find also in the Islamic tradition when it comes to this. In fact, from the very beginning, beyond even acknowledging Allah that there is one God, there is a concept that you will find everywhere in the Islamic tradition, which is the concept of fitra. Fitra is the natural state where any single human being, with or without God, here or there, wherever, the understanding here is that there is a natural yearning for an answer as to the existential question. Why am I here? which in fact is exactly what Mircea Eliade is saying when he's talking about his history of religion, saying, wherever I went, I saw people answering this question, why? And he's saying there is always a religious side to this question, and he ends up saying religion is part of the structure of the human conscience. This is him saying this. Now you can say he was a believer, of course, so we can dismiss the point. What is interesting here is that from an Islamic perspective, but also from within all the religions, there is something which is a natural yearning, a natural aspiration, first to the question. The answer to the question, why am I here? And with this, there is two other things which are important, is from the religious, the monotheistic tradition, this is understood as yearning for transcendence. The spiritual Confucianism or Buddhism or Hinduism, or chronologically you would put Hinduism and then Buddhism, they are saying that the question is here, and then you have to come back to the self to get the answer. So this is trying to get an answer without transcendence. So anyway, the question is here. And the question is here means as well a third dimension, which is naturally in this concept of human being, we need to get the answers and we need rules. And this you can get it into something which was very critical in what was to be the humanism in the West and the Renaissance. And it came, in fact, from somebody who was a Muslim philosopher, Ibn Tufayl, who wrote a book which is Hayy ibn al-Yaqazan. Very important book. In fact, this is the book which inspired Daniel Defoe when he wrote Robinson Crusoe. This book, it's coming from there. But this is, you know, the neglected part of the Western tradition. Everything was coming from the West, which is wrong. If we come back to the roots, we can see that Islamic philosophy is part of the Western culture from a very long time. But we are not talking about this. Ibn Tufayl is not taught, while Robinson Crusoe is known by everyone. The problem here is that what he is saying is something which is close to this yearning for transcendence, his yearning for rules. He was alone in the island and he needed rules. Rules means getting a sense of what is right and what is wrong, what I can do and what I cannot do. So at the moment you experience freedom, you need rules. Who said that afterward? Kant and Rousseau. This is what they are saying. You will not experience freedom if you don't know the limits. Limits are helping you to know how much you are free. And the first limits you have are biological freedom, biological limits. You need to eat. You are not free to say, today I'm not going to eat, and tomorrow I'm not going to eat. I'm free not to eat. With a limit. The biology is telling you, no way to drink or to eat. So nature is putting limits to the way you are going to deal with your own freedom, and then you add to the physical limits, the intellectual limits, and then the social limits, and then the way you deal with nature. Even nature is sending you a message that you have to respect an order. The natural order is putting limits. So the natural yearning, the natural aspiration, and then the way that you have to deal with rules, which is understood from within the spiritual and religious tradition as the starting of morality and ethics. What is necessary and what is not, and then what is good. And if you come to the very deep Islamic tradition, for example, what is going to be translated into permissible is in fact known by the people as being good, which means known by the people naturally. There is something inside the people which is the perception that it's innate. There is something within the human being which is a kind of a balance that you can know it's right or wrong. So you can get that without God, because God put it into you without you acknowledging that He's there. You got the whole understanding here. So this is the way religions, and Islam in particular, is putting this into a structure. Now, it's not the end of all that. There is something here which is in the concept of human being which is going to be very critical. And many religious people, they miss the point. Jews, Christians, Muslims, when they deal with other spiritualities and when they deal with atheists and agnostics. In fact, yes, there is a point where a believer there is an act of faith. I acknowledge that there is one God. But before this, in the name of this fitra, in the name of this spark that you have in your heart, which is this natural yearning, the very essence of your being is to be min al-karama. You are dignified. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We give dignity to human beings with his or her understanding that there is God or not. So sometimes you can see people denying God, and you have to say, I don't agree with the fact, I don't share, I don't agree with you denying God. I think that there is a God, but there is something that I cannot deny. You have a dignity. And this dignity is based on what? Coming from all, and once again, if you go deep in the religious Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, Maimonides, and as a philosopher, and the Muslim tradition, the same, you will see something which is important. 4 dimensions are important in the way you deal with your own dignity. And it has to do with the question that we have now. And once again, for me, it's not to know if I need God to get morality. I say, my relationship to God is not about, do I need Him for morality? That's not the point. This is, I'm sorry, a silly question. The other side is how I'm going to deal with morality here, which is first conscience. What means conscience? Which is consciousness, as you can say in English, which is the proper word, but still, conscience is slightly different. But the fact that you are aware of what you are doing. You are able to assess your own action, which is the double dimension, which is every consciousness is consciousness of something, which is the starting point of, I don't know if you know Bergson, or you know, even and by the way, you were referring to Sartre, and the one who was inspiring Sartre on this is Heidegger. Heidegger was talking about this in a way which was important. Conscience is part of your dignity, which is why we are differentiating sometimes in the classification of species between consciousness and lack of consciousness. This is one. The second is intellect, is the fact that you can understand. And this is something which is the way everything started in the creation, is that Allama Adam, he taught names to the human being, is that the intellect, the fact that you can get knowledge and understand what you get, which is not only getting knowledge that you can get also through instinct, is to understand. So once again, consciousness to be able to get a better understanding, or at least an understanding of what you have as knowledge. This is the second dimension. The third dimension is freedom. Freedom is essential. Your freedom is your dignity, so you can decide for yourself. And when you say freedom is your dignity, means that your intellect should help you to choose with your conscience. And with this, there is the third dimension here, which is you are responsible, accountable. Accountable, and this is the starting point of morality. And I haven't said here that we are talking about you with God, is you with yourself. Consciousness, intellect, freedom, and accountability. Responsible. You are responsible. And by the way, this is why we have lots of differences between the different religions about, are we first guilty or are we first innocent? In the Islamic tradition, innocence is the first state, and just with conscience there is responsibility, freedom and responsibility. But here we have something which is essential, that even with people who are denying God, you will find a moral sense. You have something within you which is based on your consciousness, based on your intellect, and it's nurtured from within. So this is a concept of life. It's a concept of human being. It's a way religions and trends within the religions are considering, and the Islamic philosophers, you just go to Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, all the people who are dealing with Aristotle and dealing with the Greek tradition, we're talking also about this, but this is where it is important. Now, third dimension was this sense of dignity, not the sense of dignity, the translation of what is human dignity as its his or her essence is based on these four dimensions. Now, with this consciousness, does it mean that because you believe in God, you will have a better moral behavior? No. It's never said. It's not. This is not what is said in all the religions. It's not because you believe in God that you are going to be more moral. You can believe and be and act in a very immoral way. So your behavior might be inconsistent. So you can be denying God, and in the name of your conscience or consciousness, you are very consistent with some of your principles. When it comes to, I know that you might have a problem with the concept of truth if you have studied Wittgenstein, but still, I think that there is truth. And there is truth. And there is truth with it. Anyway, this seriousness with truth, with justice, with serving the people, is something that you can find in yourself, and sometimes you will see people without God being more consistent than people with God, in moral terms, when it comes to the way. Why? Because there is no immediate connection in any religion saying you are only moral because there is God. Or you will only end by being moral because there is God, even though we think from within that there is morality because God put it naturally in us. If you understand the difference here, which is, I'm not going to be more moral than you because I believe, but I think that God put morality and a natural moral sense in every single human being, and sometimes you are more moral even if you don't believe. It comes to what? What is the secret of this? Consciousness, it's important. And this natural moral sense could be translated in our life through people who are trying their best to be consistent with their values. Be consistent with the way they deal with rules. You have some people who believe in God, and when they forget that He is always with them, they cheat. You know these stories, you can do things, and if God is always seeing you, but sometimes we are forgetting that. But you have people who don't believe in God, and they know something that their consciousness is not going to disappear. So they are consistent with this, very serious about that. And I can tell you in my life that I met people saying there is no God and very moral, very ethical. And I see people saying every day, I believe in God, praying 5 times a day, but they are cheating. They are cheating with the world and with themselves. So the assessment here is not about believing or not when we translate this. The final point in this discussion is something that I wanted to add, is at the end, my relationship to God, it's not about that. It's not about knowing if I'm going to be the end, the purpose of my life is not about only being more moral. Of course, my believing in God is helping me to be with Him and to try to be more moral. But that's not the ultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal of life is something which is beyond morality, which is exactly why sometimes when you talk about religion from outside, you reduce religion to rules and morality. And some religious people are doing this, while this is wrong. Morality and ethics are means to something which is a deeper goal, which is a very specific relationship to God, which has to do with love and inner peace, not tribunals and sense of guilt. That's not the ultimate thing. Imam Nawawi was saying about this obsession of people that is, if I do this, I will be rewarded, so it's all about ethical things. This is Iman al-Tajir. It's the faith of the trader. I give you this, I will get that. That's fine, it's a step. But there is something which is deeper than that, which has to do with Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adl wal ihsan. God commands justice and excellence. Excellence is beyond that. It's beyond I'm doing this because it's right or I'm avoiding it. There is a relationship which is how am I going to please Him and to get at peace with myself. This is the final word of all the spiritualities. The problem is not right or wrong. The problem is your ego. It's the way you deal with yourself. At the end, deep morality is the light that you are going to put in. Why are you doing what you are doing? What are you trying to reach? What is the final goal of this life? The purpose of your life? And this is where it's not only to be moral. It's to love Him. To get out of my ego. To work on something which is how this sense of morality is not only on the bad and the good, but something which is getting out of the self. And this is what is ihsan. Look at the way Muslims, I will end with this, some Muslims, and even we find this in the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, is what is the highest level of faith? And ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara, that you believe in God, you worship Him as if you are seeing Him. Because if you don't see Him, He sees you, He's seeing you. The moral or the moralists are saying, you know what, if you do something bad, He's seeing you. So they translate this into rules, which is not ihsan here. Ihsan is to be with Him, as you are with someone you love. As you are with someone who is close to you, closeness, love. Which is the final question that we have. So this is why from the beginning, when I end up with this question, we need God to be moral, I say no. I need God. It's not a need of God. This relationship is not based on I'm intellectually asking if I need Him. It's my heart which is in need of this answer, coming from this very deep relationship, which is the spiritual dimension. So translating this relationship into something intellectual is as if you were asking me to tell me the reasons of my loves. I say, I'm sorry, I can't answer. My words are not enough to tell you the secret of my heart. Now you can put this in philosophical terms. It's not going to give me peace, or it's not going to give you answer. So the secret here is sincerity. And at the end, some people can act in a very immoral way. And at one point they get this sincerity. Something is changing. So faith is a revolution. Literally a revolution is when your heart is changing. It's not coming from your mind. And it's not based on morality. But the last point is, at the end, a sincere love towards God is going to be visible in your ethical life. So it's a revelation, but it's not a definition. Get my point? Morality, it's a revelation, but it's not the definition. And sometimes some of our brothers and sisters in humanity, atheists and agnostics, they are transforming what is the revelation as if it was the very essence of the whole thing. And sometimes even believers are responding the wrong way. And this is why I think that we have to rephrase the question and put the priorities in the right place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramadan. So we now go to Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Ramadan. Thank you to the LSE Students' Union and the Islamic Society for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. I must confess being slightly surprised by the content of Professor Ramadan's talk. When I accepted the invitation to speak against the proposition that God is necessary for morality, I thought I was accepting an invitation to to speak against the proposition that God is necessary for morality, and not to speak in favour of some other completely unrelated proposition, or to reply to someone who seems to have conceded the point from the start. I didn't notice in Professor Ramadan's talk any actual arguments for the claim that God is necessary for religion, though he did touch on a number of other important points that I hope to discuss in the course of what I say, or in the questions afterwards. I'm going to mention 5 reasons for thinking that God is not necessary for morality. These are going to be 5 arguments that start from a very sort of abstract perspective and become increasingly concrete as I go on. That has become closer and closer to our everyday experience. So I'll start with more philosophical arguments and move on to more empirical arguments, but all of the arguments seem to me to have some force. And they're all reasons, as I said, for thinking that we can have, as Einstein remarked in Luke's initial comments, we can have a rich and full spiritual life, and we can have ethical conduct, and we can lead meaningful and ethically valid lives without any reference to God or any sort of religion or whatever. The first sort of reason is a very old argument, but I won't discuss it with reference to its ancient sources, but simply ask you to put to yourself the question, why do you act morally? Or why does anyone act morally? So if we think about moral acts, for instance, it might be giving to charity or being forbearing, loving your children, all of the other things that many of us, I hope, do. When we ask why we do those things, there might be 2 reasons. It might be for religious reasons, it might be because of God, or it might be for some other reason. If it's for some other reason, then it's already true that we have the means to recognise the difference between right and wrong and to act accordingly, quite independently of any religious system of belief. But if it's because of God, then it's difficult to see why what you're doing should be regarded as moral action at all. Acts that are motivated by the fact that the Scripture recommends it, or things that are avoided by the fact that the Scripture prohibits it, or that some or other form of religious teaching tells you that you should or shouldn't do it, often backed up by belief in certain forms of punishment that will take place after you die, are not moral acts, whatever the actual content of the act itself, but rather they're acts done for fear of punishment. Just as, my not committing some crime which I fully intended to commit because somebody's holding a gun to my head, my not doing it doesn't make me moral. It's rather that I'm doing it for perfectly good prudential reasons, that is, self-interested reasons. And if moral actions are done for that reason, which is, I think, the principal way in which religion can support morality, then it seems difficult to see how there can be any such thing as moral actions at all. The alternative, which seems to me much more plausible and likely in most cases, is that we already and independently have reasons for thinking that something's right or that something's wrong, and for acting accordingly. And those are reasons to which we can have access, if they do exist, without any reference to religious teachings, or religious revelation, or any other form by which these ancient doctrines have been transmitted. Now notice that nothing in that argument relies upon religion being false, or upon God's existing or not existing. I myself do think that all religions are false, but as Professor Ramadan commented, there's a classical Muslim tradition of people who think that reason is the source of morality, and that's something that we all have, and is not something for which we rely on any divine inspiration or revelation or religious doctrine. And St. Paul has expresses a similar view, so it's also a view that's held by Christians. So whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you're religious, I think this argument should carry some conviction. That is to say, this argument should give you good reasons, I think compelling reasons, to think that if we do have moral actions at all, then we can perform them and we can assess them quite independently of religion. To put it another way, if you can't tell the difference between right or wrong, if you don't know what it is to act morally or not, if you're a completely amoral agent, then being told about God and being told about religion isn't going to make you any more moral. It might make you act differently for self-interested reasons, but it won't turn you from an amoral agent into a moral agent. That's not what's going to turn that particular trick, if anything can. So I don't know which of these possibilities Professor Ramadan accepts, or whether he thinks there's some third possibility which you might hear about in the rebuttal. Moving on to the second argument now, which concerns the content of religious texts, the content of religious doctrines. It's a well-known fact that many religious texts either condone or encourage a variety of acts that we nowadays would consider, I think quite rightly, to be morally appalling. There are well-known examples from the Old Testament, which is a particularly rich source of all kinds of wickedness that was perpetrated at the behest of the God of the Old Testament. Murder, racism, infanticide, slavery, killing of homosexuals, a variety of other things which I think many of us would now regard as completely wrong, but which were, as I say, either condoned or in fact encouraged by religious scriptures. Now, I'm not citing this point to say, oh, therefore religion's bad, so it must all be wrong. I mean, that is a point that you could make, and then somebody might dispute that. But I'm not citing this fact in that connection now. The point of these examples is that, of course, we can already tell that there's something wrong with those bits of the Old Testament. And we already know, if we're Christians or Jews, we already know that we need to make some allowance for that and perhaps reinterpret the scripture, or perhaps not take that part of it so seriously nowadays, or something like that. And so the question is, how do we know that unless we already know, independently of what's in scripture or religious doctrine, what's right and what's wrong? So this is really an argument, this second argument is really an argument in favour of the first possibility that I mentioned in the first argument. That is to say that we can be moral without God. We do have an independent source of morality. We do have independent reasons for thinking that something's right or wrong. Because that's what tells us that this or that part of scriptural doctrine is invalid. Or at least bears some reinterpretation. Now, as I said, many people say that it's wrong to criticise religion on the grounds that it contains such remarks, but that's not. Let me repeat and emphasise, that's not relevant to the argument that I'm presenting today. Let me turn now to the third point that I want to make, which is perhaps a slightly less abstract matter. And this connects, in a way, I suppose, with something that Professor Ramadan said about one's ego and the diminution of one's ego that might be consequent upon religious belief. I think that in some of the most significant ways, and the ways that cause most harm, quite the opposite is true. And what I have in mind there is really the fact that, as is well known, the existence of religion carries with it the existence of religious disagreement and religious schism and sectarianism. I don't just mean, of course, disagreements between religions, though these do exist and have been historically decisive in a variety of ways. I do also mean disagreements within particular religions. There is a war, a civil war going on within Islam itself that's been going on for the last, 1,300 years, that's caused innumerable deaths and untold suffering to millions of people. The same can be said, of course, of Christianity. So the main schism in Christianity, which took place about 500 years ago, caused some of the most vicious and destructive wars in European history, for instance, the 30 Years' War and the English Civil War. These were essentially wars of religious disagreement. There are, of course, many other wars persisting into modern times that are essentially religious conflicts. An example would be the Nigerian Civil War, the Lebanese Civil War, all of the Arab-Israeli conflicts, the conflicts that took place in Northern Ireland between the late 60s and very recent times. All of these are essentially religious conflicts. That is, they arise as a result either of disagreement between adherents of different religions or as a result of schisms within some particular religion. Had religious disagreement not existed, they would never have started. Had religious disagreements not been so deep and heartfelt, those wars would not have been so vicious and unrelenting as they have been. And so here the point I want to make is what I suppose is one of the most pernicious things about religious belief, which is that precisely because it claims to be something that is in your heart, and perhaps in some sense, so it claims, beyond the reach of rational discussion, it sets itself up in the minds of its votaries as something which gives them a license to behave in all kinds of, not just inappropriate, but wicked ways. Religious disagreement, I think, is more likely than any other sort of disagreement to cause violence and death and destruction, precisely because it's a disagreement over matters that are supposed to be matters of faith and so which can't be settled perhaps by argumentation, and which perhaps not only can be, but if you believe certain religions, should be settled by killing people on the other side. And as we've seen from the history of Europe since the 1520s and from the history of Islam since the 7th century, that's exactly what's happened, which is, I suppose, what you would expect. Of course, you might say, well, you know, the people who do this, or the people who kill in the name of Islam, or the people who kill in the name of Catholicism, are not true Catholics, or not true Christians, or not true Muslims. But then I agree with Professor Ramadan's remark that you shouldn't essentialize religion, and you shouldn't have such a thing as the true Christian, or the true Muslim, or the true Buddhist. We should instead speak about historical trends, and causation, and the facts about the tendencies within these religions. And it is a simple fact that these are tendencies within systems of religious belief that do not arise with anything like as much frequency or have anything like as destructive an effect as tendencies that arise within very many other systems of belief, for instance, within philosophies or within systems of empirical belief. The point of this third argument, then, is that far from being necessary for moral action, religious, or rather what I mean now is religious belief, seems to have a tendency in quite the opposite direction. That is to say, religion, because the existence of religion makes religious disagreement, and disagreement that is of that particular nature, inevitable, because of that, it tends, as a matter of fact, to generate patterns of behaviour and kinds of conflict that are quite the opposite of what you would expect from people who behave morally. The fourth point that I want to discuss is a more, is perhaps moving closer to people's everyday experience and is a more empirical point, which just concerns the actual prevalence of behaviour that we should regard as moral or behaviour that we should regard as immoral in the world today. I would say that the evidence is not completely conclusive in either direction, but there certainly is some fairly good evidence of a correlation between, for instance, of a causation between, for instance, prevalence of religious belief and increased rates of certain crime, including homicides, increased rates of serious crime. Many of the countries with the lowest crime rates in the world, the lowest homicide rates in the world, countries like Hong Kong and Sweden and Iceland and other countries where religious belief is not at all prevalent. In fact, religious belief is relatively rare. Not all of the countries where the homicide rate is low are religious countries, but most of them are. And many of the countries where it's higher are countries where people self-report that they have, there are very high levels of religious belief, people are more concerned about religion, and it plays a big role in their lives. Now, of course, it's true that the mere existence of a correlation between those two things doesn't show causation in either direction. And you might say the reason for that is because people who live in poorer countries or people who live in countries where there's more violence are more likely to seek solace in religion. So the fact that religious countries are countries with a higher homicide rate and irreligious countries are countries with a lower homicide rate does not show decisively that there's causation in that direction. But it certainly is evidence in that direction, quite independently of that point. It does show, I think, that it's possible to have a relatively well-functioning, a relatively stable, a relatively moral, by our standards, society in which nobody really cares about religion. It plays no big role in society. Even the people who nominally are religious, for instance in this country, in the Church of England, don't really care about religion and don't believe half of it. That's certainly true of the Church of England. So of course that's whether or not it's evidence that the existence of religion causes an increase in homicide. It certainly is evidence that you don't need to have religion in order to have anything that we would recognise as a high standard of moral behaviour and a well-functioning society. The fifth point that I want to make concerns your own everyday life. So most of us, so I suppose this is coming closer to experience still. So most of us, I would hope, haven't been directly involved in warfare or haven't been victims of homicide or these other serious, obviously not, these other serious crimes. Nevertheless, we all have to make moral decisions every day. If we actually think about how this actually impacts on real life as we live it, we do have to make moral decisions every day. There are big decisions concerning things like abortion and euthanasia that many people have to take. There are small decisions, relatively small decisions, concerning giving to charity. There's the attitude one takes towards one's children. There's the political party that you vote for. These are the sorts of actual ethical problems that we face in our everyday lives. Now, can somebody tell me, well, I would challenge anyone to tell me, whether there is a single one of these problems, ethical problems that we face in our everyday lives, on which we need to have some sort of religious guidance, when we can turn to a rich and vast tradition of secular thinking about these matters, on the basis of which practically any position could be defended. I'm not here trying to oppose some sort of pluralism. I think pluralism about these matters is very important and should be defended. But I think a vast plurality of views on these ethical questions is consistent with the total absence of religion from these debates, because just about every view on every ethical question has been or can be defended on the basis of, as I said, our very rich philosophical tradition. We have tradition of ethical secular thinking going back to ancient Greece, from Plato and Aristotle to Hume and Mill and Kant and into the modern day, which can be used, as I said, in support of a variety of positions within which there is an ongoing and very lively debate, and the study of which I submit will make a much more effective and positive contribution to public morals than would what is, as a matter of fact, the typically dogmatic disputes that we associate with religious belief. Just a couple of examples of this on this point. If we take, for instance, one debate on which my own position is probably closer to those of many religious people, let's say the issue about abortion, for instance. There is a debate about abortion, and it's often characterised as a dispute between one side where people have the sort of liberal view concerning abortion, which is that it's permissible and it's simply a matter of the mother's autonomy, versus what is often cast as an essentially religious view opposing it. And of course, if that were true, then I would think that there would be a need for religion in order to support the opposing viewpoint. That is the point of view according to which we should be very concerned about the prevalence of this of abortion in this country, let's say, since it was legalised. But of course, that need not be true. The essential issues in this very deep and important ethical question that faces us today can all be cast in rational philosophical terms, and the debate can be had in a much more sensible and rational way in those terms. So, for instance, we might want to ask whether the question is, when does something start becoming a person? Does a fetus start becoming a person at 20 weeks, or 24 weeks, or 10 weeks, or 38 weeks, or after it's born, or at some point in between those? What's the relationship between being a person and being the bearer of rights? How should we balance the rights of the unborn child against the rights of people who would benefit or disbenefit from its birth? These are all deep and interesting questions to which I don't pretend to have any definitive answers. But I do think that we can profit much more by approaching them in a rational way, as we do in the philosophical tradition, rather than by simply making it a matter of a dispute between a secular perspective and a religious perspective. Well, that was one example, and the point of the example was to show that in these actual, real ethical problems that face us, okay, not just abstract questions about your heart or the essence of a human being or something like that, but the genuine ethical problems that we all have to face, there is no need for us to appeal to religion or to God to settle these questions. We already have a rich and systematic, as I said, literature addressing them. I've got a little bit of time, so let me just mention a couple more points before I end. Professor Ramadan did talk very eloquently about the relationship between religious beliefs and the meaning of one's own life and the end of one's life. And he said that actually that's something that can go beyond morality and is connected with one's closeness to God. No doubt that's perfectly true as a statement of what some religious people believe, perhaps what all religious people believe. But I didn't hear any reason for thinking that that's something that either everyone does or everyone should think. Philosophy and other parts of our experience and culture can provide a whole range of ends, ultimate ends for one's life, which have nothing to do with God, whether or not you believe in Him. One might have as one's ultimate aim the welfare of one's children, or simply to leave the world a better place than one found it. Or in the case of certain people, the changing of certain things, the abolition of slavery in some people's cases, or the abolition of apartheid, or other particular political or ethical ends. These are all perfectly legitimate ends of one's life. And I think the only mistake here is to think that there must be one single end to which all human beings have by their nature to aim, simply by virtue of being human beings. There's no evidence at all for that, and it's simply a fallacy to suppose that because we're all human beings there must be some single thing to which the meaning of all our lives tend. My own view on this question, I suppose, is closer to that of the existentialist philosophy, according to which you must make your own ends, and different people will have different ultimate ends in their life. And there's no particular reason why religion, rather than any other system of beliefs, be it political or ethical or philosophical in some other way, should not animate one's life and give one perfectly non-materialistic, perfectly spiritual guidance in one's life. It's just that this can be done without any reference to God. To sum up then, I've mentioned five arguments in favour of saying that we don't need God for morality. There was the argument that began with a dilemma about why people act morally. There was the argument concerning the sorts of actions that are condoned or encouraged in religious scriptures and how we know that those things are wrong. There was the argument from the fact that religion causes religious disagreement, and that has in fact caused the most vile and atrocious episodes in human history. There was the argument that, as a matter of fact, it seems that there's a strong correlation between well-functioning ethical societies and lack of religion. And finally, there was the argument that in the actual ethical problems that face us in our real lives, we have no need to avert to religion because we already have a philosophical tradition that can answer our needs. Let me just finish. There's a very apt quote from Einstein that Professor Bowman's mentioned at the beginning. I just want to finish with a passage from the Dalai Lama, of which I disagree with the first sentence, but I agree with the rest of it, but I'll quote all of it. What he says is, all the world's major religions, with their emphasis on love, compassion, patience, tolerance, and forgiveness, can and do promote inner values. But the reality of the world today is that grounding ethics in religion is no longer adequate. This is why I'm increasingly convinced that the time has come to find a way of thinking about spirituality and ethics beyond religion altogether. When I think that time has long passed. Thank you.
I just got the instruction here that we should open up the floor right now, rather than do rebuttals. That may get us all in. I just can throw in, 2 minutes worth here. So I'm thinking, we don't need God we don't need God for morality. We don't need God for morality. I was thinking to myself, maybe we do need God for morality. So I was thinking, let's play devil's advocate, but that wouldn't be quite right. So we play God's advocate here. So here's a thought that came to me, and I'm sort of wondering, before we open the floor, what our speakers would think of this. So you could say, look, I was listening to a radio show, and I was struck by, it was about Alexander. And they said Alexander went into battle with the Iliad. He always had the Iliad along, gave him strength, all right? And I was thinking, well, that's kind of interesting, because in a way you could say, when we fight the battle of life, there's these dark moments that we encounter, right? And these are the moments when we lose faith in ourselves, when we lose faith in humanity. And at moments like that, I think to carry on, and to carry on loving one's neighbor, one does actually reach for the books of the great Abrahamic faiths. Other people don't. They reach for spiritual poetry, they reach for fiction, they reach for other forms of art. But there's always a sense of reaching for something that has a transcendence in it, in order to live that battle of life. And I was thinking, in that way, one could say, look, maybe we do not need God for morality, but we do need some kind of transcendence, some kind of spirituality, some kind of artistic expression in order to carry through in that battle of life, just like Alexander needed the Iliad to carry through in his battles. So, but I'll stop at that, and I'll just open up the floor. So that's my devil/God advocacy here for we do need God for morality. Okay, the gentleman over there. Wait, just a second. You do need the microphone.
Talk loudly if you want.
Use the microphone.
Thank you.
This is for posterity.
Thank you both for the debate. It's very interesting. Question for Dr. Ramadan. You were talking about fitra, and when I was younger, young Muslim, one of the things that was in my mind a lot around fitra was about how to deal with someone who's homosexual, who's gay. And it was a very difficult question for me, as it will be for many people here. One of the things that happened was that there was someone I was with in class who everyone would call the word, I'll say it, faggot, but at that time he wasn't gay, or he wasn't openly gay, and then he became gay, and I couldn't deal with that because it was like, it's difficult. How do you deal with that question? Intellectually at the time, what I was reading in my limited understanding of the Quran was, Luth and all these kind of things, and everyone around me was telling me that it's bad, don't talk about it, da, da, da. Since then, obviously in my own kind of learning and things like that, I've learned that actually it's not really unnatural and whatnot. Scientifically, there's a lot of evidence around that now. But my question to you is around, what do you say to young people who are battling their fitra on one side and battling an intellectual bubble in some cases, not everywhere, but in some cases where things like homosexuality are seen as unnatural, whether it's in the science or whether it's coming out from their religious, like with the Quran or from the Hadith, and also Judeo-Christian tradition, which is also has probably more about homosexuality than Islam. So what would you say about that?
Okay, it's a pity that I cannot respond to the point. I thought that this was organized in a way where we had time to respond to one another. I will go to your question and maybe say a few things very quickly about what I heard. But first, what you are saying about the fact that we know now that it's scientifically, that it's natural, that's wrong. We don't have scientific evidence of nothing on the topic. Nothing. There is no final evidence about is it natural or is it social. If you have one, if you are sure about one, I can give you 10 others that are questioning that. But that's not the point. The point is, how do we deal with this reality? When it comes to And this is why the frame of reference coming from the monotheistic traditions, and we have the same, and by the way, the Dalai Lama has exactly the same on saying that it's prohibited from the religious tradition. Now, how do you deal with somebody who is experiencing this? And this is what I said during my talk. It's essential here. Here, we have to differentiate between the behavior that we think or we agree with or not, whatever it is. When you are coming from a religious tradition, you think that things are good and things are bad, and the way you deal with the being and the essence of the human being, by saying, I acknowledge the dignity of your being and I respect who you are, I disagree with what you do. So this is the starting point of anything which has to do with mutual respect, is never undermine my dignity as a being, even though you don't agree with my behavior. So which is an essential position here. I can tell you that within the religious traditions, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, in fact, if you look at what is happening, I don't know if you heard about what is happening in Russia, the way people are even not referring to the religious tradition, they are very, homophobes are around. So I think that within the religious tradition we have dogmatic minds and we have interpretations that are not going that way. But I think that I can say, and you should respect, the position of someone telling you, within my frame of reference, the way I believe I think it's wrong. It's not something that you should do, but I respect who you are. You should acknowledge that somebody can tell you this without telling him and ending the discussion by saying you are homophobes or you are backward or you are not modern. Or, I think that this is where we need to set the limits of our mutual respect in the way we are dealing with this.
I forgot to mention something, which was, at that time...
Do you need a microphone?
Sorry. I forgot to mention that at that time, what was also difficult for me was having spoken to people like that, who were homosexual, which I didn't agree with at the time. My fitra, or my conscience, was telling me that they really were born that way. That was... I didn't
really what?
They were born that way. Like, intellectually, forget about it. But, because intellectually I agreed with you that, it's not natural. But my fitra was telling me that this person I was speaking to next to me was...
I don't know what your fitra is telling you and the way you
As
communicate with your fitra.
Yeah.
The point is, no, but it's a very serious
It's my
question
consciousness.
here.
It's what is telling me what's right and wrong.
But it's not at the end. The way you look at it, if it's natural or not, is not going to give the answer to the religious people in the way they look at it. At the end, what we need is to have a principled position. And the principled position is never, ever to deny the dignity of being because people are acting in a way that you disagree with. The starting point is this one. Even with the worst human being, at the end, the one who can kill I don't know how many people, even in my position, the way I can look at George W. Bush, killing so many people by the way he was deciding, at the end, I respect his being, and in the name of this respect of this being, I want him to be judged, and I want him to be in front of a tribunal for what he did, and for every single human being, even Saddam Hussein and others, all the tyrants. So it's a question of respect of the being. So I took the extreme, not because I am putting homosexuals on the same side, but just to tell you the principle should be this one. And then we differentiate between behaviors, and we should accept that there are differences. So now, if it's natural or not, the way people are perceiving it, I'm dealing now with, 30 people. Some are suffering because they are experiencing this, and they are homosexuals or gay or lesbians, and others are saying it's not Islamic to condemn. I have all the different interpretations, but at the end, the communication they have with me is that they understand that the respect for the being is not pushing me to say I accept your behavior, but I don't have the final judgment on you. I don't have it, and I can't just decide this. So this is a question of respect.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Ahmed, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. my own comment on this, I suppose, is that I don't, from my perspective, I don't care whether it's unnatural or not. It simply doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that what consenting adults do in private that does no harm to anyone else is purely a matter for them, and we should leave it completely to them. And it seems to me one of the disastrous effects of religion that it even raises a question about these things. Actually, the second thing that I would say is that unlike some people who are liberal, I do of course think that we should tolerate and make room for people who have views that are either homophobic or question homosexuality and other things. It's important that they be included in the debate. But I do myself believe, and this is based on my own secular philosophical position, that it would be a violation of their rights to make, to do what they like in private, to have any concerns about homosexual behaviour.
Professor Bogan, sorry to interrupt. Slight miscommunication. If we can give each speaker 5 minutes of rebuttal and then carry on, because I think it's necessary.
Sounds great. We can do things in a spontaneous way. So, Professor Ramadan, we will do a response then to Dr. Ahmed. You did insist on it.
No, because I think it's important. The starting point of the discussion before we open up is just a reaction to our respective position, and you did it at the end as to what I said about spirituality, for example. Once again, I would disagree with the first point that you made or raised 5 points. The first one is about if you do this because you are scared of fear of the punishment, it's not really moral. This is the Kantian position, saying the autonomy of morality, that so it has to be done for the sake of the morality of itself. I don't think it's right. I think that morality could I got you, and it was public. Okay. Trying to remove the mic. That's good. Not really moral. Anyway. So, I would say that the fact that there are punishment or there are rules, for example, in our society, doesn't mean that it's not moral. There is morality even if there is punishment and you do it. So this kind of idealized perception, we do things for the sake of doing them because it's right per se. I think this is a Kantian position which is very far from the reality. On morality, he was, I think, far from the practical dimensions of things. The second thing that you were saying is that we need to have morality to assess the immoral things that we find in the scriptural sources. Because what I think that first, we have morality, and now there are other dimensions that we have to take into account here. When it comes for example, with the Quran, for Muslims to say it's immoral what we see in the Quran, this is something that would not be acceptable for a Muslim the way he or she reads the Quran. Now, we take into account the context, we take into account the culture, but still it's a whole dimension between the principles that could be trans-historical and the cultural, the models, the translation that are historical. And here is where our intellect is working, our understanding, but, and for example, the way we can deal with some of the social behavior or sexual behavior is also based on what is transhistorical and what is changing. And this is where the way you were putting it could be discussed or at least disputed from within the religious tradition. Now, to take as an example that we might not need God and religions for morality, because what we see in history is religions struggling within and with other religions, and they were, responsible for so many people. Look, that has nothing to do with religions. It has to do with human beings. Because if you look at people who are saying there is no God and no religions, they are as responsible as killing people. It has nothing to do with the religions itself, saying that you have. What is killing human beings more today? For example, the economic system, the logic of economic system, this has nothing to do with religions, but still you can have people in moral ground supporting the current economic system. There are some people even telling you we need to moralize capitalism. You know that. So the point is, it has nothing to do with religions. It has to do with a perception of, the economic system is killing today more than 150,000 people per day out of starvation. This has nothing to do with religion. So if you are going to count by saying, between religions and within religions, this has to do with what? Even for example, when you, in the 19th century, you are dealing with socialism, and scientific socialism has promoted communism, killing so many people. So without God and without religion, even killing people who are saying we are Christians and we are Muslims, by the way, in China up to now, is what is happening. So I think to take these historical examples to say, we might not need religions because, and we will get morality, I don't think this is right. I think that the problem for human beings is not religions with or without God, is the dogmatic minds, is dogmatism. And we have very dogmatic atheists as well. And these are as dangerous as all the people who are dogmatic in their own tradition. So I would say that history, Valéry, the French poet, was saying, with history you can prove whatever you want. Just take from this and there, and you can prove, and I think that it's... last 3 points, very quickly. How come can you take as an example of the more religious the society are and the more homicides you are going to get? Is this an argument? Or is this a joke? It's a joke, I'm sorry. This cannot be said. Because the real reason is, in Sweden, for example, or in this country, look at the socio-economic factors, not as the fact. You can be religious and poor and kill, and you can be rich without God and not kill. The question is the social status are much more the reasons for homicides than religions. So if you come with this, I would say this is, it's really essentializing the perception of religions and cultures and not taking the socio-economic factors that are now known as being the more important thing. I would say, and this is once again something that you cannot just go and say, okay, the less religion you have within a society, less homicides. And you take the example of rich country, more than poor country, and so I think for somebody who is a rationalist, this is not really rational. It's a problem here. When you are saying about abortion, for example, yes, at the end you have lots of references and sources you can take from here and there. That's fine, but I'm sorry. I believe in God, so I need a reference to know if I can do this or not. So even though you are telling me there are lots of people who thought about it, I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by Kant, I'm not convinced by El-Kindi in itself, I'm not convinced. I need a reference, and this reference is coming from where? It's an act of faith. So in this is why, what I was saying, we don't need God to be moral, but the believers think that God put morality in us. That's my point. I think that God put morality in everybody, and even without knowing it, even you looking for morality is coming from somewhere. For me, it's coming from God, even if you deny it. So it's as if I was in front of Einstein, and he said there is no God, and I can tell you, but I see God in you. Even he is saying there is no God. So this is my relationship with God, and it's normal for me to get this frame of reference. So when you are saying to people, you don't need God, but it's not a question of needing God or not, it's a question of believing in Him and believing in the frame of reference. And we have to respect that as something which is essential. And the last point, which I never said, to say that the purpose of life is to be close to God, this spirituality, and thinking that it's going to be the purpose for every single human being. It's not even said in the Quran, in any religious book. At the end, it's for you to decide what you want, knowing that diversity is part of humanity. That people are going to say no. That there are going to be people like you saying there is no God. And I know by God that some people like you are going there and saying there is no God. And saying my purpose is not to believe in Him, or to serve Him, or to love Him. I know through Him that you will exist. And through Him, I know that I have to respect your being. And through Him, I know that I'm not going to kill you. But that even, I'm going to leave you with your mic to respond.
Thank you. I think it might be helpful then for me to mention the five arguments that we've discussed, on which you just made a few comments. On the first argument, it's simply not true that my position was motivated by a Kantian perspective. You don't have to be a Kantian to think that doing something out of self-interested motives because of scriptural command or because of religious doctrine stops it from morally acting. Okay? And I would say that if you do something simply for those self-interested motives and not for any other reason, then it does stop you from being a moral agent. And it's not just a Kantian who needs to think that.
Why?
Because it's self-interested. I think if someone's holding a gun to your head and that stops you from, let's say, shooting someone or whatever else it was that you could have done, that makes the refraining not a moral act. It's not a moral refrain.
Why?
Because
I
it's
don't get that. If I'm giving a gift to somebody, it's to please him or her, but to please me as well. I'm pleasing myself, but it's still a gift. So when I'm doing something which is good, because I'm scared of, whatever could happen, it's still a moral act. Why morality is without the sense of even fearing the consequences or a punishment? I don't understand.
Well, the point is, it's very simple. If I said, why did you do that? And you said, because someone told me to. That's what stops it from being moral. It's as simple as that.
No, but that's not the same. It's not someone told me to do that. It's that I'm scared that if I don't do it, something is going to happen to me, which is not the same. It's not to act by proxy, it's to act by consciousness. Why is it not moral?
Well, it's quite simply not moral to act.
It's not, I don't see it. If it's simple for
One
you.
can act out of concern for others. One can act out of concern for future generations. One can act because one wants to preserve the natural world. One can act because one wants to preserve other people's rights. Those might be reasons, and those might very well be moral reasons. But if there's no morality at all, and then I start doing these things because somebody tells me to, or because the scripture says that it should, that doesn't make them moral.
No, but if with my conscience, and I do it out of consciousness, it's me, it's not someone told me. I believe in this. So why is it not moral?
There's a bit of a confusion here, right? Jump in here. It seems like the point is that if you do things, if there's self-interest in the picture, does that take the morality away? Now, if you give a gift and you do it to please the other person, but also because it makes you feel good, that is a form of self-interest.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if I hold a gun to your head and I say, now give the gift or I'll shoot you, now then I think that your gift giving is no longer...
I got that, because you accept my consciousness is not a gun. It's me. It's me deciding. And deciding to do this because I fear that something could happen. It's me and my conscience. It's not a gun. It's not somebody else. It's me believing in it. So why is it not moral? It's me. I am an individual and a person, and it's an individual and an agent of my own action. It's in me. It's not a gun. It's not police. It's God in my heart.
But it's very simple. I mean, even if someone threatens me to do something, then I might still do it because I want to avoid the thing that's being threatened. Of course, in all of those cases, you're doing it because you want to do it, you're conscious, you're an agent. That by itself doesn't turn a non-moral act into a moral. Moving on to the second one.
I guess the God in one's heart is interesting here, right? Because there is the God in one's heart which is positive force, but there's also the God in one's heart which is a fear of punishment. And it seems like if it's a fear of punishment, I'm with Dr. Ahmed. If it's the God in my heart is a positive force that pulls me forward, then I'm with you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad we've resolved that one. Now, let's move on now to the second The second argument, which I'll only discuss briefly, because I think everything that Professor Ramadan said, well, much of it was true, conceded the conclusion of that argument, so I'm happy to leave it at that. On the third point, which concerned religion and religious disagreement, yes, of course it's true that there have been all kinds of atrocities and so on that have been done as a result of atheist secular systems. For instance, communism was one of the greatest crimes of the 20th century. No sensible person, I think, could dispute that.
And capitalism.
No, I would say capitalism is vastly superior to communism and nowhere near as disastrous for the whole human race as communism was. But that's not relevant at the moment.
Disputable.
What is relevant at the moment is the question whether religion itself has a positive or negative influence on that. And that's either claim is consistent with conceding that, for instance, communism was a disaster. So that one might say, so for instance, Stephen Weinberg said it very simply and straightforwardly, I think, which is that probably if there was no religion, good people would still be doing good things and wicked people would be doing wicked things. But it's religion that makes good people do wicked things. And it's religion that has caused wars that would not have occurred had it not been for religion. And those wars have gone on because of the nature of religious belief. And they would not have gone on as long as they have, or been as wicked as they have been, had it not been for religious belief. I mean, there's vast amounts of evidence for that, none of which I wholly dispute. On the fourth point, which concerns homicide and levels of religious belief, all of the things you said concerned the causal relationship between religious belief and homicide, and I'm willing to accept that it's much more to do with social arrangements and levels of wealth than it is to do with prevalence of religious belief. I'm quite willing to accept that. That, as I said, wasn't the point of the examples. The point of the examples was simply to show that you could, in fact, have, it was possible, because it's actual, that you can have well-functioning, broadly ethical societies in which there is more or less an absence of religious belief. And that is, that was in support of my position on the claimant issue, which is whether
without considering the socio-economic issues.
No, of course. No, of course I do. And the point is that you can have societies which are wealthy, which are socially stable, and in which, as you would expect, as a result, there are low levels of various types of crime. Those societies, as a matter of fact, happen to be very irreligious, and that's strong evidence for the claim, which I'm arguing for, that you can have a socially stable, well-run society, which is ethical, without religious belief. That was the point at issue. That was the question is false.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, do you dispute that?
Oh, yes. Yes, I dispute. Go ahead.
On the, finally, on the fifth point, I must have misunderstood you because I did, but that was certainly a straight misunderstanding on my part. I did think that you said something which implied that all humans have a single goal, and in fact you didn't say that, so that's, I'm happy to concede that. But as far as the relevance to, again, as far as the relevance to the proposition that we're discussing goes, we are discussing the proposition whether you can have morality without God, and perhaps in a broader sense whether you can have meaning in your life, or something spiritual, or transcendent, as we put it, without God. And I think that that's perfectly possible. I think, someone like Einstein, for instance, could be described as a spiritual and transcendental person. And there are many people who have reached beyond what you might regard as the more basic material needs and interests of human beings in an entirely secular way. So I think that there is no need for religion in that connection. It may indeed be that for certain people, religion happens to supply that need. I wouldn't dispute that. But that, of course, wasn't the point of the point at issue. The point at issue was whether you could have these sorts of kind of meaning in your life without religion. And I think there's plenty of evidence that you can. Thank you.
Short comeback, and I find this really too exciting to stop at 5:30. My only problem is I have to do a talk myself on the other side of campus at 5:30. Now I'm going to have them wait a little bit, but I can't have them wait for very long. So I'm wondering whether Dr. Walters could take over from me in about 5 or 10 minutes, and if the organizers are okay with extending it until 6. Yes? Is that all right? So I'm just going to let this go for 5 more minutes, then you come up and you call the questions. All right, Professor Ramadan, you want to do a short response, or do you want to just open it up? Yes, okay, good. I'm going to go to the person right behind the last speaker. That was the person that had a hand up? And she gets the mic first.
If we could possibly finish at 1:45 rather than 6, because some of the Muslims play Maghrib.
Sounds good.
1:45, and then we'll all head off for Maghrib. The Muslim attendees, feel free to join us in the prayer rooms. It's nearby, so you can pray Maghrib as soon as the event finishes.
We just thank Professor Bogdan. I'm not the person who turned on an episode of The Wire like 5 minutes before the end and not got a clue what's going on, but it sounded like it was really good. So we're now moving to questions from the audience, and I think probably we've got 15 minutes, so why don't we take groups of 3 and then come back to our 2 panelists. So, any questions? Go for it.
Thank you. My question is to the second speaker. I hope I understand your argument correctly, but in your first argument, to support the argument, you say that if a person has no idea about what is right and wrong, even if you introduce a religion to that person, that is not going to make him convert him from being amoral to being moral. So that leads us to a thinking that if you think something is right and I think something is wrong, a third person can say that in reality actually one of us is right and one of us is wrong, which means that you think morality is objective. However, in your fifth argument, you say that how the secular decision or thinking, pluralism, whatever, is better than having a religious perspective given to problem solving, and how it's much more better to settle disputes. Here you say that, here you kind of hint that morality can be subjective. So do you think the 2 arguments contradict each other?
Okay, thank you. The answer to that question is no, I don't think my arguments contradict each other. And the reason for that is that, from my perspective, a preference for pluralism is quite consistent with there being one right answer. I would rather have lots of different people give different answers, even if all but one of them is wrong, than for all of us to believe the truth. That's my belief. So I can think perfectly well that pluralism is compatible with there being one right answer. And I do think, if morality exists, then there is one right answer. But that's the short answer to why those arguments are consistent.
Okay, another question. Yes, this person here. Can we get a microphone around there? And then I'll come to you. And then I'll come down here to you.
Hi, this question is for Dr. Arif Ahmed. My question is human intelligence enough to define what is right or what is wrong? Because at the end of the day, please take into account, for example, intense, something like homosexuality or abortion. Some people believe that they are right, some people believe that they are wrong. To what extent do we define the truth? Who knows the truth at the end of the day? Please answer this. Thank you.
Yeah, let's take 3. So we'll come to this lady now. Yep, we'll group them together.
Yeah, that's fine.
Hi, my question is for Dr. Ahmed. With respect, I feel that you've constructed something of a straw man argument based on everything that's wrong with religion, whereas I think the question was really about God. So my question to you is, if you strip everything away, imagine all the scriptures didn't exist, but conceded that there could be a God, do you believe you have an innate moral capacity, and if so, where does it come from?
Okay, we're working Dr. Ahmed very hard here. And,
That's good, carry on.
Can we get the mic down here to this lady here? Right down in front here.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I have 2 questions for Professor Ramadan. My first question, in Syria, President Bashar Assad, he killed like massive civilians, but the world doesn't recognize him as terrorist. But in Egypt, former president of Egypt, Dr. Morsi. He's been regarded as terrorist, but he's actually the one who opened the tunnel for the food supply of the Palestinian. So I cannot digest that. My second question, just now you said that about his son, to be with him as if you are with someone you love. Can you give me advice? How do you consistently put God the highest in your heart? I mean, the ahead. So, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ahmed, do you want to take these two questions as individually or together?
Yeah. Okay, in response to the first question, yes, I think it's quite a reasonable position to think there has been moral progress, and that we now, for instance, have a closer to the truth about what's right and wrong than we were, say, in medieval times, or in Roman times, or in some other times. Exactly whether you think progress has occurred will, of course, depend on your moral theory, and the moral theory itself might supply the answers to how you can ascertain what is right and what is wrong. So, for instance, utilitarians will have one sort of view, other people will have other sorts of views. There are various different views concerning what makes something right or wrong. Kantians will have a different sort of view. So the people who reject a religious source of morality are not themselves going to agree on how it is that we can know what's right or wrong. A Kantian might think it comes from reason, or a utilitarian might think it comes from some kind of calculation concerning consequences. They themselves have disagreements. And it may be that we have a better idea now what's wrong, which positions don't work than we used to, and we're closer to the truth on that matter. But I agree that it's a very difficult thing and it's very contested. The one thing I would like to insist upon is that although it's difficult, we should acknowledge that it's difficult and not seek easy answers in something that's completely unverifiable and for which there's not a shred of evidence. In response to the second question, I don't know, it's an empirical question whether or not we do have an innate moral sense, that is to say, innate source of judgments concerning what people should and shouldn't do. I think there's some evidence for it, but there's some evidence against it. But again, the thing that I'd like to emphasize is that the very last place we should expect the answers to these questions to come, setting aside religion altogether, but just as a sort of single cosmic source of all value, to be the creator of the universe, because the very different sorts of views about what's right or wrong that have existed amongst the people who believe in this person and who claim to have a hotline to him shows that at best the signal is highly garbled and so could hardly be regarded as a source of ethical knowledge. If there were one, there isn't, but if there were.
Yes. Just one thing that, for the sake of mutual respect, in the way we talk about this and what I said at the beginning, I'm very scared, really, in my life, with dogmatic minds and the way they can translate their thoughts in the discussion. But people that claim that they have a hotline with God and things like this, I think it's problematic to talk like this. I don't like that. I would never talk about anyone who can say I deny the very existence of God or I have a doubt in a way which is diminishing or dismissing their position. This is the first thing that we need in philosophy, which is intellectual humility, in the way we portray this. Because, in fact, it might be that you are referring to me in the way we translate that. And I think it's not right. I think in this dialogue, when it comes to God and the way we have to talk about that, I would say it's just a reaction in the way things were put. It's not really within the topic, but I can connect what you were saying about to the topic in one way, just to try to do that. About the way we are labeling people, who are the terrorists and why people are labeled terrorists and put on the wrong side of the moral equation by saying, for example, Bashar al-Assad is a dictator and at the end, morality and labels could change. Some people, when they are supporting some causes, are perceived as freedom fighters, and when they are resisting the same people or other people afterward, they are perceived as terrorists. So, for example, in Afghanistan, the Taliban for a while were, fighting against the Russian, and then when the Russians were not there, they were terrorists. So, and the same with bin Laden. Things. So, morality and politics don't match in an easy way. So this is why there is a third factor which is important, which is power. Who has the power and who has the power to label? And we have to be on this. I'm very, very scared of the people, once again, who are entering in the political realm with a very simplistic and naive way of dealing with morality. We need to get the power, should be part of the discussion here. And as to the second question, it's a deep question. It's not another lecture. It's a long seminar on how do you get this? How do you get... it's not easy to translate your relationship to God into something which is not based on punishment and fear, but beloved or loving reverence, which is the true definition of taqwa. Taqwa is not fearing God, is loving reverence. It's something which is, how do you get that? How do you nurture this? It's a very long relationship with yourself, and it's about education. It's about, and then there is also something which is important, because it's a virtuous circle. The more you do this, the more your behavior is going to be moral, and the more your behavior is going to be moral, the more you are going to free yourself from yourself. So there is something which has to do with behavior.
Now we have 3 minutes, and I think Justin's telling me to take one more question.
Yeah, if we could take the final question from the upper seating portion.
Oh, right, yes, yeah,
and ask them to raise their voices.
Who's got a good question? Yeah, at the front there. Have we got a microphone up there, or you can shout for us? Shout.
Oh, okay. You said if knowing God needs to go beyond religion, should we render scripture obsolete, as it is causing more harm than good? And what is the purpose of scripture, since that we have our fitrah already to be moral?
To me?
Oh yeah, this is
Maybe he has to work on it. But I'd like him to answer this one. No, I think that that's a very good question. And it's a very good question that you find in at least in the Islamic tradition. But once again, it's the very understanding of what is a revelation. And in the three traditions, and if you look at the one, if we talk about Islam here, there is something which is, the revelation is coming to remind you of something which is in you that you knew, and in this, there is something which is deep, the spark in us. And you're on one verse in the Quran responding to your question, when it is said, God is the light of heavens and earth, and the end of the verse is light upon light. The revelation is a light coming to reach the light that you have in your heart. But with the light that you have in your heart, it's not enough to remember. So in history, you have this revelation coming to you to remind you of what is in your own self. So we need revelation. And we need revelation for many reasons. First, because of our nature, that we are forgetful, that we can forget the meaning. The second is, it's a mirroring dimension. To read the revelation is to read yourself, and to read yourself is to read nature, and to read nature is coming back to yourself, and all this is the spiritual experience. So we need the revelation for that. And then the last dimension of revelation, which is not the first as some scholars are putting this, starting with the revelation but putting, these are the rules. No, the first dimension of the scriptural source, of the scriptural sources, is much more about light, love and morality than rules and legislation. So it's also to give you the way, the foundations for you to know how to behave in order to nurture this. So the way you are with your heart is going to be through your behavior, and the revelations are telling you how you move ahead, how you move on, how you have to deal with it. Always sending you back to three dimensions that I refer to in my talk. The first is your consciousness, the second is your freedom, and the third is your responsibility. This is essential, and all this is the very meaning of the light that needs light to get the right path. At the end, the way I will put it is light in your heart help you to see, and intellect with your mind help you to move. So you need the light to be able to move, and you need to move relying on the light.
Thank you. We've got to wind up. Do you want to make a final?
Yeah, thanks. So I suppose my final remark would be this. I think one of the valuable things that that's come out of this session is that it has, or at least I hope it has, got across, part of what it would be and part of what it would be involved in living an ethical and meaningful life, spiritually meaningful as well, life without religion. I know that for many people who are religious, especially those who've been religious all of their lives, it can seem quite frightening and daunting to imagine life without religion. And that's not helped by the sort of cartoon characterization of atheists as people who are heartless, heartless, scientifically minded people who have no room for any spirituality at all, or anything meaningful beyond what's material in their lives. That is caricature, and that's a completely false picture. And one thing, as I say, I hope the arguments today have got across, is that if you're contemplating life without religion, or you want to think what it would be, don't be put off by the idea that atheism is empty and cold and devoid of any meaning. It's quite the opposite. There is, as I said, a whole rich tradition of meaning and thought and spirituality into which you can connect if you reject religion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, despite my late arrival, I can see that this has been a very respectful and thoughtful discussion about a topic where we need a lot more respect and a lot more thought. So can I thank you all for coming, thank ISOC for organising it, but particularly thank our two distinguished speakers, Professor Ramadan and Dr. Ahmed. Thank you.